So it's a really big hello and welcome, and amazing to see so many of you joining us for what is hopefully going to be the beginning of an extremely exciting international webinar series looking at this question of what can higher education do to support students to flourish in their life, both at universities and indeed when they leave universities in their wider life and work. This whole movement in terms of kind of looking at how we can ensure that higher education is truly transformative has been a movement that I know many of you on the call looking at the people who are joining us today have been very much part of this movement over the last few years, really trying to ensure that university is not just about grades, knowledge and skills, which clearly is very, very important in any university education, but it's also about who students become through the incredibly formative educational experiences they both get at pre-university and indeed when they come to our institutions and organisations, of course relating to their own individual flourishing and their societal flourishing. So as the incoming director of the Jubilee Centre, but also as a Deputy Pro-Vice Chancellor for Education for the University of Birmingham, it's been my absolute pleasure to be working with 5 other universities from around the world who are extremely well known in looking at the place of character and the development of attributes in higher education to explore some of these big questions, both about the how the what and the why of these questions, but also the how. How do we actually go about offering opportunities and experiences for our students to develop incredibly important qualities and attributes for their future lives? And so that is the big question, really, that is the premise or the driver for us coming together as a collection of universities and offer up this webinar series that we will be undertaking over the course of the year. As you will see on this slide, and as you've been emailed about previously through the registration process, we have hopefully a programme of 5 excellent webinars for you taking place over the academic year. So we have colleagues on the next webinar from Wake Forest University and their programme for leadership and character, who, led by Michael Lamb and his team, have developed an extremely well-recognised model around kind of character education and higher education, and also supporting a lot of other universities, particularly across America, in developing this agenda. The principal innovation team at Arizona State University, again, have built up a huge reputation for the work they do around principal innovation, which started in Mary Lou College, which is actually the largest teaching college in America. And now that principal innovation, character and attributes-based approach is being spread across all of the universities. So we'll be hearing from them in the second webinar. In the third webinar, we've got the Oxford Character Project, again, which is globally recognised as leading in this area, both in terms of the programmes they offer University of Oxford students themselves, but also in terms of their research that they've looked at in terms of professional education that so many universities take part at, and the place of ethics and character in that work. We're delighted that colleagues from the Institute for Leadership at the Ivy Business School are going to be presenting the 5th webinar, and particularly looking at the place of character and ethics in business leadership, but also how that might extrapolate into different sorts of subject areas. And then finally, the last webinar will be by the Civic Humanism Centre for Character and Professional Ethics at the University of Navarra, where, again, they're making a really big impact around this area, particularly in the Spanish-speaking world. We know that many other universities, because I've had emails from you, would also love to present webinars in the future, and we hope to run this series in future years and showcase practice from many other universities as well. And I think I'd be fair to say, speaking on behalf of all the different universities and centres that are leading these webinars, to say that we're all working through some big challenges and questions around this sort of terrain. And certainly speaking for ourselves at the University of Birmingham, we've still got work to do in this area and a lot of learning, which is one of the reasons why I'm particularly looking forward to joining all the other webinars for the rest of the year to inform our own practice and what we're doing in this space. But hopefully in the spirit of humility, we'd really like to share our own journey today, the University of Birmingham's own journey, in terms of how we're trying to ensure a focus on what we call here the graduate attributes, but include many character virtues and qualities, how we're making sure that they're much more explicit in our educational offer to all the students who attend our university. And very soon I'm going to be handing over to our Pro Vice Chancellor for Education, Deborah Longworth, to set out that approach for us. Just before I do so, there's a couple of things I want to share with you. Firstly, I just want to put on the record right now a big public thank you to Rachel Bushby, who has helped to put together the whole of this webinar series and been sending you all the emails and encouraging your registration during this time. So it's a big thank you to Rachel. But the other thing I want to do is also just talk briefly through some of our aims for this series. We certainly want to inform theory, research and practice. And so we've asked all the presenters on the webinar to talk about the why and the what. So what is actually kind of the conception theoretical background to why we're doing this work, but also focus on practice, the question of how. So with these webinars shouldn't just be what we say we're going to do, but also what we're actually trying to do in this sort of space. The reason for that is we're hoping to inspire forms of innovation in your own establishments and to kind of learn and share ideas and think about how you might adapt these into your own spaces, but also collaboration. For those of you who very much believe that the purpose of an education is something more than just the grades and tests, but actually is about the development of qualities that are so necessary for broader flourishing individually and across the world. Then I think this is about us building a community and learning from each other and sharing research, working together on funding bids and other formal and informal collaborations. So we really hope this webinar series will contribute to that. But ultimately, we hope it will in some small way make a wider transformative difference to encourage students who attend our universities to feel better equipped for the world ahead, and indeed the many challenges that will face them when they leave university. The other, sorry, just before I share some contextual, we really will invite questions from you after you've heard from Deborah and my presentations, which we expect to take up around 20-25 minutes, leaving enough time for questions and answers. If you'd like to leave or ask us a question, you can either do so publicly in the chat, which you will see on your screen in Zoom, or if you use the Q&A box, and that will just go through to our chair for the questions, Andrew Peterson, who will pose those questions to Deborah or myself. We will invite people to contribute by raising a hand as well at the end. But during the presentations, if questions come to you or if you want clarifications or to check anything, please do feel free to use the chat and the Q&A boxes to ask us questions, and they will be collected and posed to us. So just before I hand to Deborah, I just want to give you an insight into a survey that the Jubilee Centre conducted back in June. As you can see, we had 804 students who took part in this from over 100 UK higher education institutions. And that's a broad spread of the participants who actually took part in the survey. But three key findings, which I think really set the backdrop for this whole webinar series, and certainly the presentations that Deborah and I are about to give. The first one is that the majority of students, 84% surveyed, agreed that it's important for universities to provide students with opportunities to develop their character. That was that's probably not surprising, because it replicates so many of the other surveys that we've conducted with parents at schools, or students in schools, or in professions, etc. There's a general acceptance that there is a place in education for focusing on this space, which is perhaps not surprising. As you can see, only 2% disagree with that, 13% neither agree nor disagree. The second key finding, which I think sets a really interesting backdrop to this, is that of those students who said it was important that universities put an emphasis on character, that 45% of them felt the primary responsibility for this character development in universities actually lay with themselves. Which is, again, perhaps not surprising given their age and stage, but reminds us that we must allow for autonomous decision-making to avoid any sense of paternalism in how we go about our business in this space. Our job perhaps is to inspire, to encourage, to motivate, and to provide opportunities for students to explore the development of key attributes and character qualities, but to allow them to engage as critical and rational thinkers around these debates. And why we place such an emphasis, as you'll see later, on this idea of kind of character sort. And the final finding I want to share, which I think again sets a necessary context, is that we asked a slightly unfair question, but a question that we've asked previously in our schools work, is that we asked students, those 804 students, if they were forced to choose between developing positive character traits necessary for life, work, life and study, or obtain good academic results necessary for life, work and study, which one they choose. Now, clearly, that's a slightly unfair question, because most of us would agree they're two sides of the same coin. If you're developing positive character traits, you're likely also to be doing better in kind of positive exams and academic results. So it's a bit of a false dichotomy and an unfair choice, but it does present an interesting picture when students were forced to make that. Of those respondents, 45 respondents selected character traits over 55 who selected the exam and academic results. Now, I think that might be symptomatic of maybe three particular drivers. Firstly, and again, this is a UK context, and I know many of you are driving us from countries around the world, and be interesting to know if this is similar in your own context. But I think in the UK context, this may be symptomatic of the messages that many students have received during their schooling before they come to higher education about what is particularly important in education. They come with a feeling that it is actually the exam results and the grades that matter. The second is there's obviously the implications around fees and the expectations for fees paid at university, and what outcomes you receive from those fees, and whether too much of that dialogue is focused on exam and academic results and not on that wider, broader education that you gain during that time. And perhaps the third driver of this finding around, emphasis on exam results is perhaps a misguided but often common expectation that may be what gets you the job. That's what employers want, that actually it's the grades that it gets you the job. Whereas so many employers, as I'm sure Deborah's going to go on to say, actually are requesting so much else from students when they seek jobs. It's around their skills and their knowledge, of course, but also their attributes and qualities as well. And just finally, when we break this down, it's interesting to see there was a fairly even split when actually you just looked at the difference between female and male respondents. So actually, male respondents were more likely to select academic and exam results over character traits when forced to choose, but also a very interesting split, I think, between the arts and humanities students, who were more likely actually to select the character traits than the STEM students, who were more likely to put an emphasis on exam and academic results as well. And those might be indicating areas where we might need to strengthen areas of communication around this area. But with that, I'm now going to hand over to Deborah Longworth, who is our Pro Vice-Chancellor for Education at the University of Birmingham, who is going to talk about the University of Birmingham's position on focusing on the graduate attributes in our broader educational offer. So over to you, Deborah.
Thanks very much, Tom, and for inviting me to join today. And hello, everybody. It's very nice to meet you sort of virtually. Our graduate attributes, I suppose it started as a project work, has been running for about just over 3 years now, from the initial research and conceptualization of the project and the work that we did with students and employers to identify the series of behaviours, skills, wider values, attributes that we wanted to emphasize. But what's happened sort of over the period of the last few years is that we've also wanted to really take that work from being a project that sits on a website, usually quite close to our careers service, and results in a tick box exercise for students to identify where they've perhaps gained one or more of these attributes, to being something that actually was sort of fundamentally embedded within, is the foundation in a way of our educational offer and what we value in education at Birmingham. And it was really interesting seeing those results from the survey that Tom was showing. When you give students the either or, yes, then we do start to get some of those extremes, but actually 84%, I think it was, of students recognised the value of something that is more than just the grade and the final degree result at university. Although I would think that I would guess that many of certainly my colleagues on the ground in Birmingham would find their day-to-day experience quite often students focused very much on assessment. Partly due, as Tom said, to a culture of school education, where of course achieving a certain grade gets you to the next step along the way. And we absolutely recognise there is a work of transition to do with students when they arrive at university, where it is not just the grade that gets you to the next step from university. But I think this sort of question of what is a university education is something that's, I mean, it's been around a long time, but I think the majority of people, students, staff, the public, would all recognise that a university education is more than just the degree result that you come out with at the end. But we've never been very good at articulating what that additional value actually is. And certainly within the UK, we have had over the last few years, a sort of gathering public media, political policy context that is bringing these questions very much to the forefront of our thinking. How do we articulate, measure the value of a university education? How do we define education excellence? How do we define, as we are asked in the UK in our new governmental teaching excellence framework survey, how do we define educational gain? And actually, while I think we understand absolutely what we mean by that, we have struggled to put it into words, and certainly to measure it, or measure it in a way that will satisfy some of those contexts. So I think this is where, certainly for us at the university, there are a number of drivers for why a focus on being able to articulate that wider educational value, particularly as embodied in the graduate attributes, why we need to be able to demonstrate that and focus on it. But also, I think there is a real genuine commitment to wanting to value the breadth of development that we see our students going through, and that is often so much more than the grade which they often hang on to and value perhaps the most. And of course, there's a series of stakeholders, and there's more than those I've listed here, that are key to that conversation, and that we have certainly involved and engaged in both the development of our attributes and the processes by which we are gradually rolling them out and wanting to embed them in our university culture. Our students needed fundamentally to be able to understand the range of skills and attributes that they are developing and be able to articulate those in the wider world and in interviews and things like that as they move on from university. we wanted them to understand all of the many benefits that the opportunities and benefits they have available to them at university, and to make the most of them, to avail themselves of them. And one of the things that we were noticing even before the pandemic, and certainly in the immediate aftermath of the pandemic, was that an anxiety about the grade was resulting in less uptake of the volunteering opportunities, the sports opportunities, the wider co-curricular opportunities that the university offered. We were also aware that in perhaps more practical skills, digital skills development, for example, students for whom those skills were more unfamiliar, were furthest away from their discipline area, were uncomfortable about taking optional modules, for example, that might be encouraging them to develop those skills, but where they felt insecure in the likelihood of the grade that they would get, a concern that actually if they go outside of their comfort area, even though they know those skills and wider attributes, group work, communications work, things like that, why they might be valuable to them, if it reduced the grade, they wouldn't go anywhere near them. So we were aware that we needed to both support students' value of those attributes, and also find ways of how we might implement and deliver them. So a lot of work with students, a number of workshops with our employer partners really articulated a mismatch between what students were understanding, or what students thought that employers were looking for in graduate employees, and what employers were actually looking for in graduate employees. Students always had the grade, usually always a 2-1 and sometimes a first, at the top of that list, with resilience down at the bottom. And if you just reversed it, you were probably closer to where the employers were. Certainly, students thought that internships as part of their programme were more important than employers ranked them. They put communication skills relatively low, critical thinking, problem-solving skills relatively low. Again, employers had these right at the top of the list. So there was a mismatch there. And employers were regularly saying to us, we are increasingly getting students with very high grades, but without the kind of practical skills and behaviours that we really need to see. And then I think for university staff, university leadership, there's nothing more soul-destroying than a student who's in your class just because they want to get a grade, and a bit of passion and enthusiasm for the subject and for the wider value of that in a broader education, I think is absolutely something that university staff in their day-to-day lives want to see. But university staff are also very invested in their students. They recognise the opportunities to flourish that a university provides, and they have been, certainly in those I've spoken with, been increasingly disillusioned by this very grade-focused approach that we have been increasingly seeing. For university leadership, certainly at Birmingham, we are a red brick civic university with strong links to the city, and we are very aware of the needs of the city, both in terms of the support the university provides for the wider community, and the ensuring that our students are developing those skills and attributes that the region needs. In terms of policymakers as well, I mentioned the TEF, the Teaching Excellence Framework. Usually universities aren't too keen on government bureaucracy and regulation. Actually, the question about how we define education gain in the recent TEF was something that I and a number of my colleagues in other institutions as well, in some ways welcomed as at least a recognition of that wider value to just the outcomes in terms of grades or in terms of salary after a period of time, for example. There's easily measurable outcomes. There was a recognition that actually it was difficult to articulate and difficult to measure, and an invitation to universities to explain and articulate how they define, measure and help students to progress in terms of their wider educational gain. So a range of stakeholders there, all coming at it from slightly different ways, but all coming under that wider question of what is a university education in its broadest sense? How do we articulate it? How do we measure its value? So Tom, sorry, if you move to the next slide. Thank you. So this is the set of attributes that with our students and with a number of our employer partners, we settled on back now in probably around late 2020. And we'd organised them under 4 main areas at the time, at the headings: academic excellence, futures-minded, civic-minded, ethical leaders. And you can see there the range of attributes grouped under each of those. So we had 16 altogether. I think one of the things we were very aware of is that we can only really genuinely make these work if we can engage students in believing in understanding, in being able to even interpret how these might play out in their actual education and in their wider activity, both at university and where they see their careers in the future. So Tom, if you could move to the next slide. Thank you. Sort of concurrent with the next step then of the Graduate Attributes Project, the University of Birmingham embarked upon a rebranding exercise with a branding company who were doing a lot of work to understand the university's identity, how staff and students identified with the university, and working on particular case study projects that we wanted help with, not in a very sort of cynical marketing kind of a way, but actually how we talk about ourselves and how we understand the work that we do. And actually the Graduate Attributes then and Education Gain became one of those case studies that we took up. And the key question we were basically asking is that cultivation of the graduate attributes is absolutely integral to the University of Birmingham and to our education offer. We want to ensure that they are clearly articulated, tangible, understood by students. But how do we frame them to capture student hearts and minds? How do we take them from being 16 boxes on a website into something that becomes really lived through our university culture? Tom, thank you. So working with the rebranding company, we started to focus down the graduate attribute list as we had it, and did a lot more work with students, so a later set of students, to bring more focus and also to avoid some of the repetition and overlap that was coming through in some of that original list. And our key focus there is what do we actually want these to do? What do we want from them? We want University of Birmingham students to be recognisably stronger in every aspect of life. And that was coming particularly, I think, out of the employer feedback around resilience, critical strength that employers were looking for. And under each, so we ended up with 3 headings there. You'll see we moved away from the civic-minded, and that's partly because that came then underneath the wider set, and also because feedback was showing us that students didn't really quite understand their role within the language of kind of civic collaboration. So we've ended up here with academically engaged, self-motivated learners, researchers and learners engaging in cutting-edge academic disciplines, future-focused, resilient and innovative in the activation of positive change with a commitment to lifelong learning and personal development, and practically wise to act with humility, confidence and good judgment to do the right thing at the right time. And practically wise became the replacement for the civic-minded and ethical leaders, where we wanted to ensure that we were being inclusive with all of our students, but also more practically focused, I think, in terms of driving the attributes forward. Tom, sorry, if you could move to the next one. Thank you. So we didn't lose the sub-themes. This is where we have, I think, finally ended up. We're just coming to the end of this project and rethinking the language. And academically engaged is almost certainly going to become intellectually curious, because actually we think all of this has an academic underpinning. And we wanted that curiosity and the excitement of curiosity to be fundamental to the more disciplined knowledge, research-based set of characteristics. So we've ended up here with students who are subject specialists, critical and creative thinkers, interdisciplinary, instinctively digital, with an entrepreneurial spirit, sustainably focused. Sustainability, as with many institutions, has become one of our fundamental strands of our education strategy. So we wanted to ensure this was in here. And then under practically wise, socially engaged, natural collaborators, and courageous integrity. This has played now and landed very well with our student body and with our staff body. And so we're quite excited now about taking this forward. I'll just say just a couple of quick other things around implementation. We also recognise, I think, as part of this wider project on educational gain, that our academic calendar and assessment structures over the year, we have 2 semesterised structures, squeezed out a lot of the time that we used to be able to invest in co and extracurricular activity. And we were still stuck with that problem that I mentioned at the beginning, that students wouldn't reach out of their discipline areas where they knew they could, they could predict getting a high grade because they felt comfortable there, to actually explore different modules that might help them to develop some of these attributes. So we wanted a way around that. What we're embarking on this year onwards is more of a 3-term model, where we will have a lot of our core teaching, programme teaching covered in the first and second terms, largely 3rd term assessment period, but with a 3-week within term period at the end of the summer that will offer both community activity, academic transition, but also a range of professional and personal skills development, sort of micro CPD courses, I suppose, that students can take and get badged, etc. We will run an e-portfolio where students can record the different activities they take place in, but also support that with their personal tutor meetings to talk about actually how they are developing the attributes, the areas that they want to focus on, their goals for the coming year. So it doesn't become too much of a, I'll take these courses and I can tick these boxes, but it actually becomes embedded in the students' ambitions through the different stages of their programme. So that's that rollout that we're just starting to launch now. I'll stop there because I'm sure there'll be questions later, but hopefully that gives you just an overview of where we started from and the stages we've gone through to really try and embed the attributes in as really the core of our education offer at the university.
Thank you very much indeed, Deborah. And what I'm going to do, and I'm going to make sure we leave enough time for questions and answers, so hopefully over the next 10 minutes, is just give a bit more flavour to where Deborah was finishing off there about the how we go about this. As Deborah's outlined, a really strong case for why we do this and what is our focus around this. But clearly, though those only matter if we're able to offer genuine opportunities for all our students to actually undertake and take part in activities that will help to cultivate those qualities. And you can see from Deborah's presentation why I was so keen to join Deborah's team when the opportunity arose. To many of you who know me and looking through the list, I know a lot of you who've joined this call today will know my work within the Jubilee Centre with colleagues is very much focused on kind of character education and development of kind of human qualities in largely school-based settings, but also with working with kind of Michael Lamb and Ed Brooks books and others developing a kind of a statement around higher education and character education. But what's most interested me is not to write these statements and these frameworks, but to look actually how they can be practically applied, and to get the opportunity to work in Deborah's team and actually, really to see whether the sorts of areas I've been writing about, and get the chance to actually see how they might be applied in our own institution, is a really big challenge, but very exciting opportunity. And I hope to talk you through just briefly some of the steps we're taking in that particular area. The first thing just to briefly acknowledge is that there's some key principles around this. I'd say the big key principle is for us to move the often implicit, as we know most staff, students, etc. agree with this. Universities have been developing graduate attributes, character qualities since the beginning of time. This isn't new stuff, but what might be newer is taking that more implicit approach to bring it more into the explicit, as Deborah's been mentioning quite a lot in terms of our much more prioritization around this. Bring a sense of a common language so students and staff and employers can discuss and talk around these topics, to ensure that there's a universal offer, and this is a challenge, but this can't be something that's just for certain students from certain background or those who just take part in extracurricular activities to engage in. We have to have a universal offer for all students. It's up to their choice if they want to engage in that. We strongly encourage, but it's their choice to engage. But the offer's got to be universal at least. It's got to recognise student choice. So although we presented a list of 9 graduate attributes, different students may focus on different areas of those that they feel are more important. And of course, many of those are synonyms for other graduate attributes. That's just a kind of indicative list of 9 that can bring us some focus and emphasis on those areas. But also, of a university with 8,000 members of staff, there's got to be staff choice within this as well. This isn't telling all staff what to do in this area, but it's providing, as I'll explain, a framework and an approach and some leadership to encourage this to occur much more explicitly, a focus on this across campus. Of course, there's challenges in each of those principles: the large and diverse student body, as I've already mentioned, the students' perceptions about the purpose of higher education, which has been mentioned earlier, that we might be having to do a job to start with to get them to truly buy into this, but also letting 1,000 flowers bloom, i.e. staff across the university, taking these graduate attributes and the framework, which I'm going to explain in a minute, but then applying that in their own else, but also trying to keep some consistency within there. But I would say that's a fairly kind of standard challenge for anyone in a higher education leadership position, that every day we walk the tightrope between kind of what is a top-down and a very bottom-up kind of approach to this sort of area. And we're recognising both of those in this space. So in terms of the emerging, and I am using the word emerging framework, this is the sorts of areas that we're focusing on, and I'm going to give some practical examples around this. This framework actually builds, for those who recognise it, on the Jubilee Centre's framework for character education in schools that recently won the QS Global Education Award last year, and also builds on much of the work from other partners on this webinar series have done in this area, as well as wider theory, evidence and practice. But what we're trying to do within this framework is bring some kind of practices that different sections of the university, so not just the careers network, which often this stuff ends up in, but right across university, can actually build on and look and see what this actually looks like. And I will give you some examples of what the practices we're taking part in there. But just to say that I will mention something at the end also about measurement and evaluation around this, but you can see in terms of our success criteria, we'd like students to know and understand that the graduate attributes matter, and there are opportunities here for them to develop them as an awareness piece, that we'd like them to value these so they recognise the value of developing the graduate attributes in their own and others' lives. And we'd also like them to take part in activities that help to cultivate them as well. Those are all sought, so we'd like, it's up to them to take part in these opportunities and avail themselves of what we're offering them to develop, increase awareness, develop, a positive attitudes and values towards them, and take part in activities. But it's for them to ultimately to seek them out, seek them out. In terms of these practices, again, those people familiar with the Jubilee Centre framework will know we'll quite often talk about taught, caught and sought. I've talked about sought, which is the students coming to this and kind of through their own autonomous critical thinking and engagement. But clearly a lot of graduate attributes and character qualities are developed through the ethos, the culture of the university. When they step into university campus, we'll all remember it from our own university experiences, how much of a formative experience is. And so much of that formative experience is almost the intangible elements of being at a university and the values that it prioritises. And here are three kind of clear practices that we're putting a focus on in different sorts of areas. So ensuring that this is seen as a prioritisation, and as you can see from Deborah, who's in charge of education for our university, is showing how much of a university, how important it is for us to prioritise this as an area, and making it one of our key areas of our new branding exercises, again, an expression of that prioritisation. But of course, if that's all we did, then we'd actually be probably doing worse than anything else, because the worst thing we can do is actually just tell students it's important and then not ever give them any opportunity to seek out opportunities to strengthen and develop these qualities. So the other practices all build off that prioritisation, including, in court, so much of this is around the role modelling that goes on, what students actually see. We have to be marked, if I use that word advisably, around our own expression of these graduate attributes as a staff body. We need to be kind of role modelling and exemplifying them in our day-to-day practice, whether that be in teaching, personal tutoring, through all the other opportunities. But also we want to exemplify them in alumni who may return and tell other students about their experiences at university and their experiences going into employability and the sorts of qualities and the experiences that have been so important for them to get those roles and jobs and that focus on them. So again, that's work that we conduct. And of course, in terms of core approaches, recognition. And this isn't recognition in terms of kind of extrinsic reward, but we must also recognise that recognising these is a key driver to students thinking that they are actually important. And so we have a big ambition to elevate our enhanced transcript, which is the transcript students get when they leave university, to not just recognise their grade and qualification at the end, but also have a genuine, which we're likely to call the Birmingham Award, a genuine recognition of all the other activities that they've been involved with during their time here that have developed these graduate attributes, and have that as a very clear part of the graduation ceremony at the end. In terms of taught practices, these are the more kind of explicit approaches that are part of the core and the co-curriculum that we're developing a lot. And these are bringing much more visibility and genuine opportunities for experiential and reflective learning. Masterclasses, which is a term that we may work with, but you can see here these are specialist classes that develop knowledge, skills and attributes. And Deborah mentioned that we've reworked our academic year to allow 3 dedicated weeks during the summer term, where a whole rich programme of cross-curricular, cross-disciplinary, as well as attached to core programme activities that sit outside of that assessment period can take place and students can participate in. They're outside of the expectations towards assessment, but it's still very much part of a rich education here. We're reworking our personal tutoring to try and encourage that personal tutoring isn't just an extended academic conversation, although that is clearly very important in our academic tutoring, but also a discussion about the sorts of graduate attributes students need for life after university, and through a reflective coaching, mentoring approach, and an e-portfolio, which Deborah mentioned, attached that as well. But really, this also really matters in experiential learning. The development of graduate attributes and character qualities and virtues is not done through theory. It's done through the practice and trying out a practice and learning through experiences and making mistakes and maybe doing things differently, etc. And we offer a whole, like most universities, a whole plethora of different kind of experiential opportunities. But we bring these together, for example, in the Birmingham Award, which is both a a way to kind of reward students who have taken part in experiential learning opportunities, but it's the opportunity itself is not enough to get the Birmingham Award. It's the learning that is attached to it through the coaching, the mentoring, the training, and indeed the reflective practice pieces, which actually go through an exam board, which allow students to actually gain that Birmingham Award at the end. I'm just going to conclude, because I'm noticed the time, with two very brief comments. Firstly, on evaluation, which I can't get into properly, but I cannot avoid this question because it's a question we're always going to get asked. And basically in this area, you're basically damned if you do and if you're damned if you don't in this area. But clearly it's hugely problematic to try and measure gain in these areas. But also if we don't try to put some evaluation around this, then we endanger not actually learning from our approaches and what we can do better in this space. So we're trying to adopt a sensible yet pragmatic line around this, to undertake evaluation, but acknowledge the limitations of it. And you can see here all sorts of qualitative and quantitative measures that we are able to collect data to improve our own practice, but also to see whether students are developing their increased awareness, changing attitudes, and also taking part in activities that might help them habituate some of these qualities over time. But happy to take further questions on that in any Q&A. And just to conclude, still, as I've said, a great deal of work for us to do, and we're really looking forward in particular to learning from the other webinar presenters across this series to learn about the work that they're doing in this space. But I think we hope what Deborah and I have presented here is an insight into us as a university putting this much more front and centre of our educational offer to students, and ensuring that they have real, genuine, authentic opportunities to engage and take part in activities that will hopefully prepare them better to flourish, not only as individuals, but to contribute to society more broadly after they leave us. So I'm going to stop there and hand over to Andrew, who's going to chair. I think we've got about 10 minutes or so left for the Q&A. I've not had a chance to look at any of the chat or the Q&A, but I can see things coming in here right now. And I await, with some interpretation, Andrew's questions that he will be posing to Deborah and myself.
Great. Thank you, Tom, and thank you to both yourself and Deborah for your presentations. So, colleagues, we have a few minutes for some questions, so we'll go straight to them. Deborah, I know you've had an exchange with Joelle on the chat function about possible impacts of the graduate attributes on recruitment and admissions. So I just wondered, for anybody who hasn't been able to see that conversation on the chat, whether you might like to say a few words about possible impacts of the graduate attributes on admissions and recruitment, please.
Yeah, sure. So I think the initial question was about whether whether we would use the attributes in how we recruit students. So would we effectively change our admissions process? We certainly wouldn't do that. But what we are doing, and of course, this is partly helped by the fact that we've worked with the rebranding team on the graduate attributes project itself, is that certainly these will be part of the marketing and recruitment approach and communications, and certainly we will be using them and modelling this language through things like welcome day presentations, welcome presentations, and then actually we want that language to work right the way through. I'm still using it for things like graduation ceremonies and communications with alumni. So it's not that we would be using them to select students, which I think was perhaps the question, in terms of recruitment, but we would certainly be using them as part of our marketing strategy, so that students are seeing, as I was saying, that sort of wider gain of what do you get from a university education.
Great, thank you very much. We'll move on to a question now aimed directly at yourself, Tom, and this is from Jorg. Tom, this goes back to the survey data that you spoke about right near the start of the webinar. And Jorg's question is, in light of the survey, do you see any indication of significant changes of student attitudes or expectations regarding the importance of character education at the university, and how those expectations might have changed over the past year or past decade?
Thank you, Jorg. I can also rely on you to pose a challenging question, and lovely to see you. It's a really good question, actually, because again, those people who know the work of myself and the Jubilee Centre will know a lot of it has focused on schooling, where there has been some shift, a slow shift for sure, but shift in kind of emphasis around a focus on character and character education in particular, but also linked to kind of the wider personal development in schools. And the most clear change of that in the UK is that personal development and character is now a very clear part of the Ofsted inspection framework, and all schools are expected to show what they do in this space, and they can't achieve outstanding unless they have actually got an outstanding practice in those sorts of areas. So, and our surveys that we've conducted with teachers and also the wider public suggest that there is a shift in that. So more teachers, for example, than 2018 use the term and aware of the language around character in schools. So you would hope and expect perhaps that there would be a shift in this coming through to higher education, but I don't think that will have come through yet, because it's going to take, you know, maybe nearly a generation, but certainly a whole kind of several school years to see that coming through. What I can tell you though is, as many of you will know, the University of Birmingham has a school that is attached, well, just off the campus, but it's the University of Birmingham School that has put a great deal of focus around attributes and character qualities. And what we very clearly see in those students, because many of those students decide to come to the University of Birmingham, we don't tell them they have to, but many of them decide that they want to come to the University of Birmingham, which is great. They are probably the more articulate students when we have discussions with them around these qualities and attributes, and they're necessary to develop them for their own lives and other lives in the future as well. So in that kind of by tracking students that we see going through our school and into university, we can see that there is a clear connection between what they're you know, kind of what they're learning and the focus of this in school into higher education. But we need to keep a watch on that over time. But my only hope is perhaps the bits of changes that are happening at school level might mean that we're getting students coming forward. Deborah, I think you're going to add.
Yeah, if I can come in there, it is really interesting. We did some focus group work with students from the University of Birmingham School, who'd obviously been through the character education process as we were developing the new calendar and the summer term activity plans. And at the school, there will both be pupils who will start at age 11 and go all the way through, but some join for sixth form, so have had less you know, have had fewer years of character education being embedded, and it's a bit anecdotal, but certainly what came through from those focus groups is those students who'd been there for longer were completely on board with the summer program, and there was almost a kind of, well, why wouldn't you do this? And yes, you know, this sounds great, and we would be involved in it, and it's sort of what we would expect. Whereas actually, for some of the students who'd only joined at A level, they were a little bit more, what's the point of doing that? What would we gain from it? Why would we want to still hang around and do anything after we've finished our exams? And so that was interesting, actually, seeing that difference and how the character education from a younger age group, you know, being carried through over sort of 5 years did seem to make a difference in that small focus group cohort.
Great, thank you both. Deborah, if we can come to you, we've had a few questions on the Q&A function, so I might, just because of time, combine two and try to make the link. So one links to one of the very last slides, really, about what next, but how the university might support university teachers and academic members of staff to work with students in relation to the graduate attributes. And then the second question that I'm going to link in here is really around the diverse student body, and in particular, in the question, mature students, and whether there's a risk that the graduate attributes focus more on younger students who come straight from school, etc., and perhaps don't recognise, or how the university might recognise the diversity of the student body and the experience and the attributes they already bring with them to university.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. And actually, I'll put probably the two questions together just for an example, I think. So one of the things that we want to do is our personal academic tutoring system use that to support students' reflection and considered reflection on their their development needs and how the graduate attributes work can support them, and that and so we are asking our personal academic tutors in their summer term meetings with their students to reflect on the graduate attributes using the ePortfolio tool that we're using. And to think about their development trajectory over the coming years, supported by their academic tutor. So it is quite a it's not a skills matrix kind of exercise. It is about, how's your academic work going? How's your co-curricular work doing? What are your ambitions, and how can we support you? And we will be putting training in place for personal academic tutors for that. Now, obviously, we have undergraduates from diverse backgrounds. We have them from schools who know absolutely the value of doing this kind of thing. We have them from backgrounds where being able to take skills courses, volunteering opportunities, other kinds of activities to help develop the attributes, it's really important. That's in term time, because during the summer term they are working for money or they have caring commitments or whatever, and that's typically been where our internships and project work and wider opportunities have been before, so we needed those in the term. But we also know we will have mature students, we will have postgraduate taught students, for example, who may well not be straight from school or even continuing from undergrad. We think that doesn't mean they would not benefit from dialing up or down different a different selection from the attributes list. What we're not saying is all students need to be managing all of these every year. But for example, when we've been working with our employers, our STEM employers are emphasising the importance of communications skills in our graduates, and that is something they are seeing as lacking. So actually, we think there are ways there where we work with the student and the particular individual student's learning gain needs to focus on the attributes that are most appropriate for them to develop. And so I think that's one way where we think that becomes most practically useful for that broader and more diverse set of students. Does that answer the question?
Great. Thank you very much, Deborah. Thank you. Colleagues, unfortunately, we've run out of time for questions. So thank you to everybody who's posted them. Apologies that we've not had time to answer everybody's questions, but hopefully these are things that will be picked up on as we go through the further webinars in the series. I'll just say my personal thanks to everybody who's asked the question, and to Deborah and Tom again. And Tom, I'll hand back over to you now. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed, Andrew, for chairing that session. Again, apologies we didn't have enough time to do all the questions, but we will pick those up and answer those we can't answer, but also we will hand them on to our the baton to Wake Forest, and we'll pose all those challenging questions to them as well and see how they answer them at the next webinar. So just concluding to say another thank you to Rachel, Deborah and Andrew for their participation in this. A really big thank you to all of you for joining. It's great to see so many familiar faces, but also so many new faces on this webinar as well, and so many people we've learned from and will continue to learn from this webinar. And please do, we'll send out all the details in advance, but please continue to join us for as many of the webinars going forward, and indeed keep the conversation going with us as we grow this community around this area, so we can start to really kind of, as I say, develop transformative change in this area across universities across the world. So have a great day or rest of the day wherever you are, and we'll see you all soon, hopefully. Thank you.
Thank you.